Now that we've gone through and looked at the various components that make up the customer service module within Microsoft Dynamics 365, I'm going to go through and take a look at the various analytic tools that we can use to be able to slice and dice the data to be able to provide better customer service. In this module, the objectives are to discover how to work with Advanced Find tool, to identify how to best work with the Editable Grids, to work with the Report Wizard, how to be able to utilize Excel by exporting data and using Excel templates. Using the Advanced Find function is an excellent way to extract data from the Microsoft Dynamics 365 database. It uses a query defined by the user to filter the data and provide the data set results. It can also be used to prepare data to export to Microsoft Excel for reporting functionality. Users will find that understanding how to use the Advanced Find tool will help them in other areas of Microsoft Dynamics 365, such as there's an Advanced Find functionality found in the Goal Management area, the Report Wizard, and even managing marketing lists, just to name a few. Advanced Find provides a more powerful search tool for finding records that match complex criteria or even very simple criteria. For example, if a user wanted to search for a list of accounts that had an annual revenue of over $1 million and they were from Texas, they could use the Advanced Find tool to find that list of accounts. In order to define an Advanced Find search, the following must be specified: the record type to search, the search criteria, as well as the record columns that you want to be able to show. Now, in addition, Advanced Finds can only return a single record type. It cannot return accounts and contacts in one list, for an example. Now, another important thing to keep in mind when first beginning to use the Advanced Find filter is to ask yourself, what kind of record do I want to see? So let's examine the Advanced Find interface, how we would begin to design a query, and the overall Advanced Find functionality.
Okay, so to take a look at the Advanced Find functionality, we're back in the Dynamics 365 application. And with a lot of the functionality that we have across the Dynamics 365 application, you'll find that using and being able to utilize the Advanced Find tool is very similar to some of the other functionalities in that you can use it throughout the application, and this depending on where you are within the application as to where it's available. For example, when we first log into the system, again, we go to the main page, and that main page may default to one of the customer service system dashboards. And you'll see that when we're actually in one of those dashboards, in the command bar, one of the options that we have available is to launch the Advanced Find tool directly from the command bar. But if we go through, and let's say that we are going to our cases, so we're going to go to Service, we're going to go to Cases. And when we go to Cases, you'll now notice that in the command bar, I don't have that Advanced Find tool that's available. So it just really depends on where you are as to where it's going to be available. Now, that said, you'll see that you can use that Advanced Find tool at any time within the application by looking up in the title bar, and in the title bar, you'll see that you also have an Advanced Find icon. It looks just like the filter icon that we see when we're looking at system views. Now, as we talked about in another lesson, out of the box, Dynamics 365 have multiple views or system views available to us that we can use to be able to filter down the records. So for example, we have my active cases. So I can now just look at the active cases I'm currently working on, and I can see I've got 20 of them. Or I can look at cases opened by me in the last 7 days. Or I can see cases resolved by me in the last 7 days, which doesn't look like I've been doing a lot of work. I can see if anyone else has resolved cases in the last 7 days. Or again, I can just look at all resolved cases. So being able to go through and filter out certain records based on certain criteria, there are system views that are automatically available for us. But if we find that we want to go through and be able to have where I just want to look at all the high priority cases, I don't have a system view that's available that looks at and that just shows all of the current high priority cases that are out there. And this is something I want to use often. So to be able to do that, I can use my advanced find functionality to go in and find those records for me. Now you'll notice when I click on that advanced find functionality, that by default, depending where you are, and again, in our situation, we are in the case record type, and I was looking at my active cases. Well, you'll see in the look for, it automatically filtered down by cases. And not only did it filter down by cases, but it also automatically looked and showing me the criteria that is used for active cases. So you'll see I can now see the criteria that was used to build this system view. We go in and we take a look at some of the other ones, such as my cases or cases resolved by me in the last 7 days. Again, you'll see that I can look at now all the criteria where the status is equal to resolved. The case resolution activity record has it where the status is equal to completed, created on as the last 7 days, and the owner is equal to the current user. And you'll even see that some of these fields I can dynamically go in and update to be able to get different results. But you'll also notice that some of these other fields I cannot change out of the box. And that being that if I want to make modifications to it, I'm going to have to tell it that I want to view additional details. So again, what I do want to do is if I want to look at all of my active cases that are set to being high priority, I do want to start out with the used or the saved view being called active cases. Now, again, the current status is equal to active, and that's fine. I want to leave that status there. I want to leave that criteria there, but I want to continue to add to it. So to be able to do so, you'll notice that we actually have a command bar. And the command bar actually has 2 different tabs available with it. Now, depending on what you're viewing within the advanced find tool is depending on which tab you're probably going to use. So for example, if I want to be able to expand on the criteria and use what they call the query designer, this is where in the query section of my command bar, I have several actions. One of the actions is the ability to view my details. When I click on the details action, you'll now see that if I wanted to, I could go in and change the status. I can change the operator that's used and then change the values as necessary. Not only that, but I can now add additional criteria that is going to filter down the records based on how I want to see them. So from here, I can now go in and I can say where I want to look at where my priority. And then the operator, you'll see that the operator that I have several options. And the operator values will change depending on the data type. So what that means is if I have a text value, I can have it where it's equal to, not equal to, where it actually just contains data. I can tell it where it contains certain values, begins with, ends with, does not begin with, and so on. But you'll notice that, let's say, for example, that I want to look at the modified on date, which is a date field. When I change the data type of being a different type of data, such as date versus text, and I now click down on my operator, you'll now see that the operator values can be different. And what's nice, like when you're dealing with date fields, is you can even have dynamic fields, such as I want to look at the last X number of days, and I can say I want to look at the last 5 days. Or I can say I want to look at anything older than a certain number of minutes. So anything that is older than 60 minutes, I want to be able to go in and look at the modification of it. Or again, depending on the value that you're looking for, I can go in and say even just do it off of the last number of months. So anything that is older than the last 3 months, which again, when we're dealing with cases, hopefully we're not going to have that. So it just depends on the actual data type that you select as to what operators that you have available to you. Now, from here, again, I can go in and I can set up to where my priority is equal to, and then you'll notice that, again, depending on the field that I'm selected, I have multiple values that I can choose. So if I want it to be where the value is equal to high, then I can go through and just choose high because it is an option set that I can choose from one of the pre-existing ones. Now, from here, if I want to see what my results are, again, from my command bar, you'll notice that you have a results icon. So I can actually review and test the data to make sure it's pulling the information that I want to see. So from here, you'll see I am looking at just 9 records versus the 28 records that we have. And when I look at my priority field, it is just pulling my high priority cases. Now you'll also see that when I go through and I tell it to run the results, I now automatically am switched to the other tab in my command bar. And I have several other commands that are available that I can use. Just right from, without having to select any records, I have the ability to run default reports that might be available within the system. I can use my refreshable Excel templates to be able to go in and create an Excel template from this data. Or I can simply just take the data and export it to an Excel spreadsheet and continue my analysis within Excel. The other thing you'll also notice is that I have the ability to select multiple records within my results set. So if I wanted to, when I have those records selected, I can go through and I can actually send a direct email. I can merge the cases together. I can send links. I can share those records. Or again, we can go through and export the data as necessary. I can associate tiled cases. Again, we talked about merge cases. I can add them to queues as necessary. So there are certain actions I can perform on those records just within the advanced view feature. Now, we're not quite done with this. So let's say that I'm looking at the results and I like what I'm seeing, but I also want to be able to go in, since they are high priority cases, I want to be able to go in and see not only as far as when those cases were created, but I want to see when they were modified and who modified them. So I want to go back and I want to make some additional fine tuning to my actual result set. So to be able to do this, I want to go back to my Advanced Find tab, and then in my command bar, if there's additional columns that I want to be able to add, this is where you'll see from the command bar, I have the Edit Columns action. So I click on that action button, and it will come in and now let me know I have the ability to edit columns. Now, typically it takes a few seconds for actually to load those columns. You don't have to click on the OK button for it to load the columns before I can now see the existing columns that are part of that view. So you'll see I can scroll to the left and right to see those existing columns. Now, a couple of things I can do within those columns. Even with the existing columns, if there's information that I realize that I may want to rearrange it. So for example, let's say I want my customer column to be the first one on the list. I don't want case title, I want customer. So to be able to rearrange them, that's where you'll see that you have your common tasks. So I can highlight the column I want to have rearranged and then use the arrow keys to rearrange them in an order that I would prefer to look at the data. Now, not only can I rearrange those columns, but I can also resize them. So for example, the priority column is a little bit larger than I need it to be because again, we only have high, low, and normal as being the default values available for my priority field. So one of the things I can do is when I have an existing column selected, I can click on Change Properties. And now this is where you'll see if I want to reduce the size of that column, I can simply reduce it based on the pixels that are available to me. And you'll now see it will reduce those sizes as necessary. So I might want to do the same thing for case title, might want to do the same thing for case customer. Now most of the time, because the case title can be a little bit longer, I may not want to make that to being too small because I'm not going to want to resize them later on. Now the other thing I also want to do, as I mentioned, is I want to include some additional fields. So one of the things that you will see is when it comes to adding fields, by default, if I have an existing field selected, the new fields will automatically be added to the right of that existing field. So if I want this to go after the Created On field, I can highlight the Created On field, and then from here I can click on Add Columns. And what's nice about this is not only do I have the ability of adding columns, from my current record that I'm working with, that being the case, but I can also add columns from any of the underlying records that I may work with as well. So again, if we might be talking about accounts, or again, being customers, being a counter contact. So an example might be that I want to be able to show the state and the city of where those accounts from that are related to those cases. Or again, I might want to be able to see as far as the resolved by KPI on if we're dealing with service level agreements, and I want to see if we are compliant with our service level agreements of being able to follow up with that customer within a certain time. So you actually have several options of being able to add columns not related to, or not just for the case type that you're working on, but for the underlying or related case or the related records as well. Now, you can't add accounts or contacts as we talked about previously. So I can't have the results being cases and accounts, but I can have values or fields from those records be incorporated into this view as necessary. So again, we look at this and we actually have my case. And so what we want to do is we want to add from my case, and you'll see we have quite a few records that we can select. And the ones I want to be able to select is I want to be able to have it where it's modified on, as well as who was the last one to modify it. I select OK. And now you'll see that it added those two fields to the right of the field that was currently selected. And you'll also see that it added it in alphabetical order. So let's say I want to have modified on before the modified by field. Again, I could just use my arrow keys to select those fields and rearrange them as necessary. So once I'm done, I can click OK. And again, I now want to see what my results look like. So I click on results. And again, I can now see where I have my customer first, I have my priority, my origin, and then of course, as I scroll over, I see my modified on and my modified by fields. And then again, I can perform any actions that I want to on these records, again, by either exporting them to Excel or running an Excel template or creating Excel templates from this as necessary. Now, a couple of the other things that once I have this data the way I want it to be, from here, I can now create a personal view from the Advanced Find feature. So if I want to be able to regularly view just all of the current high priority active cases, this is where you'll see in the view section, I have the ability of using the Save As button. When I click on the Save As button or the Save As action, you'll see it will automatically pull up the existing view that was used to create this particular Advanced Find. But now if I want to change this, I can call this as being my active, or let's say I want to call this as being my high priority active cases. And then again, I can even give it a description if I want to expand to provide more details as to what is covered or what information is related to the criteria and that view. Once I click on Save, you'll now see that the saved or used saved view changes to high priority cases. So now the question is, what does that do? When again, anytime I want to review the results, I click on results, I can view that information. But once I save that as being a saved view, a couple of things will happen. By default, I can go in and you'll see again from my command bar, I have an option there called Saved Views. So I can see any personal saved views that I may have created. So your Advanced Find tool is not only just used to be able to filter down and look at specific records, but it also can be used to be able to create the personal views and be able to manage them as well. Also, when I've created, and since I created that off of an existing system record, if I close out of my Advanced Find functionality and I go back to my case views. Now we're not going to see it yet as I go through and I scroll down. Actually, that showed up. Most of the time, as far as if you don't see it within the list, and it just depends on timing, you can always go in and you can refresh your browser to be able to look at that information. But now what I can do is anytime I want to see those records, I can go to My Views, click on High Priority Active Cases, and now from here, you'll see that like some of the commands that we've discussed in prior lessons, I can now go in If I wanted to create an Excel template, I can create an Excel template off of this. I can export to Excel as necessary. I can look at the charts and be able to do any kind of further analysis on those records as necessary. Now, one last thing also just to take a look at when we talk about these advanced finds is you can get very complex when it comes to creating various criteria with the advanced find. So one of the things I can do is if I want to go back and relook at, or let's say I want to revise that view as necessary, I can click on the icon for my advanced find. And again, you'll now see I'm looking at the existing criteria that I built for this particular personal view. From here, if I now want to make modifications, again, under the query, I can click on details. And let's say I want to do it where it's either the priority is equal to high or where the origin is equal to phone, because most of the time if someone's calling us, it's because there's an urgent information. So I might want to have it where the priority is equal to high or the origin is equal to phone. Now, when I add that criteria, notice what happens when I run this. When I run this, you'll see it only filters down the 3 records. Because again, by default, when I'm using that query designer, it does what they call as far as an assumed and statement. In other words, saying where the status is equal to active and the priority is equal to high and the origin is equal to phone. But what if I want to have it as being an or statement? Well, this is again where you can use the query designer to be able to reconfigure some of the criteria and how you're looking at it. So you'll notice next to each one of these criterias, I have this drop-down arrow where I can select multiple criteria at one time. And then once I have multiple criteria selected, this is where I can now use the group by features. So again, let's say that I want to use group by the or statement. So now when I run this, it will be where the status is equal to active or where the priority is equal to high or the origin is equal to phone. So now when I run my results, you'll now see I get a whole different result set where the priority is equal to high or normal, or the origin is equal to phone, or again, it has email on here because the priority is equal to high. So you have the different options when you're going through and you're creating your different views or using the advanced find feature. If I decide for some reason that I don't want to have that or statement, it's like, well, that's not quite what I was looking for. You'll notice I can click on the drop-down arrow next to or, and I can ungroup them. And if I want to delete any of the criteria, I can click on that drop-down arrow and I can choose delete. And because I'm working with a personal saved view, you'll notice not only do I have the ability to do the save as feature, but I also have the ability just to save the changes that I've made. So again, what's really nice about being able to, as you're building some of these different, or you're searching for records within the system, is to be able to run the results to see that information just directly within my advanced view or my advanced find feature, and then again, execute right from that and be able to export the information into Excel or to be able to perform tasks or actions on those records. It makes it very easy to have some complex criteria to be able to find the specific records that you're looking for. So again, I can save this, I can close this, and then also, as we talked about, is that when I have that advanced find feature and I can have the ability to go in and create personal views, I can then very quickly and easily navigate and look at those records as I need to and then perform further analysis on those details. So you'll find that the advanced find tool can be a very useful tool throughout the entire Dynamics 365 application.
Editable grids provide rich inline editing in the main grids and subgrids so you can update information you need with fewer clicks. Editable grids are supported by the standard record types such as accounts, contacts, leads, opportunities, as well as other or custom record types. Now, similar to record edits made in the record form, Editable grids use an auto-save process which means the record being edited will automatically be saved at regular intervals. That said, though, it is still possible to click the Save icon to save the changes made. Some other functionality that is part of the Editable Grids are the ability to group by any column on the current view, as well as moving and resizing columns, the ability to do a lookup configuration, as well as enabling or disabling of cells based on security role. Now, there are some considerations to think about when working with Editable Grids. By default, Editable Grids are not enabled within Microsoft Dynamics 365. It is necessary to enable them on an entity-by-entity basis. Also, as with standard forms, Editable Grids are subject to the usual field security level settings. As a result, view, read, and write permissions for fields shown in these grids will vary in line with the permissions for each user. Additionally, regardless of permissions, some fields will always be protected. For example, a status field can only be updated from the command bar rather than editing this within the grid. The customer and owner fields are also protected from inline editing, but the owner field can still be updated from the list view by selecting the Assign button in the command bar. So now that we have a better understanding of what the Editable Grids are, let's say they how to work within the application.
So we're back in the Dynamics 365 application, and to be able to take a look at how the Editable Grids work. As mentioned previously, Editable Grids are not enabled by default. So what that means is when I'm looking at my views, so say I go back to my active cases, there are certain fields that I cannot change from the view perspective, such as priority or origin or even owner. So to be able to make those changes and to have the grid available that I can modify those values, I can do so by going through and enabling the Editable Grids. To be able to do that, I want to be able to go to my module selector, and for my module selector, I'm going to go to Settings. I'm going to go to the Customizations. So we're going to go through and we're going to actually make some modifications. Now, as with some other steps that we've done within the system, the task is not to go through and go into deep detail about how to customize the system, but more just to get a better understanding about how to enable the functionality that is built into it. So once we're in the Customizations pane, we want to click on the Customize Your System option. And then in the customization view, what we want to do is, because the Editable Grids can be enabled on a entity by entity basis, we can decide which entities we want to have it enabled on. So again, we can expand the entities. So again, we can do it off of accounts, we can do it off of activities, appointments, KB articles even. And I can scroll down and you'll see one of the options there is for case. So I can select the case entity. I don't want to double click on it. I don't need to expand on it. I just want to be able to view the details of the case entity itself. In viewing the details of the case entity, you'll see that I have several tabs of information related to the case. To be able to enable the Editable Grids, what I want to do is I want to be able to click on Controls. So it's actually a control that I'm adding to the functionality of that entity. So from when I click on the Controls tab, I have the ability to click on Add Control. And then from here, you'll see that there's several controls available. The one I want to be able to enable is my Editable Grid. So I can confirm that that is the one that I want to include, and I can click the Add button. Now, once I add the control, what I now want to be able to do is specify which platforms I want it to be available in. So I can limit it to where I can just only use Editable Grids within my web browser platform, or within the tablet and platform, within the tablet and web, but not the phone. Now, in our situation, we're going to do it for all three platforms. You'll also see that some of the additional things that you can do is I can add lookup configurations. I can even go through and I can configure nested grids. So if I actually have, if you remember, like in the case form, that not only can I see the current case that I'm working on, but I have a subgrid of all other related cases. So I might want to be able to make some modifications in those related cases subgrids. So I have those options when I'm dealing with the nested grids to be able to decide as far as how I want to customize them. I also have the ability to be able to enable the group by column. So what that will allow me to do is that when I'm looking at my cases, so if I go to service and I go back to my cases, is that it will give me the ability to group these records based on certain columns, very similar to what we saw in the advanced find feature. So you'll notice that by default, it is enabled. So once we have the control added to our entity, we want to go ahead and we want to save our changes. And then once we save our changes, we're going to have our entity come back. We also then want to publish the changes that we've made. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on publish and let it publish those customizations. And now once those customizations are published, then what we can do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to close out of the entity form. And if I wanted to, and again, just to double check, I'm going to go ahead and tell it to publish all customizations just to make sure that it did get published correctly. So once we've had those customizations published, and I go back to my Dynamics 365 environment. Now, a lot of times you do have to refresh the view to be able to see the changes that have been made. So once I go through and I refresh the page, you'll now see that the view itself looks a little bit different, that I can actually see separators between my columns. Now, I still have the ability to go through and resize them, but you'll also notice that for my priority and any editable fields that are available, I now have a drop-down arrow. So again, directly within my view, I have now the ability to go through and make modifications. Now, as we discussed previously, there are some fields that I don't have the ability to edit, and you'll notice that it will acknowledge those fields by having a little red asterisk next to it, showing that I cannot change those field values on demand. Now, there are some things that I can do, and you'll notice that depending on some of the values, I can go through, and you'll notice I can change my case title. If I wanted to, I can also then go through and I can update other records as necessary. And then depending on as far as some of the records that you're working with, I even have the ability to drill back and look at the additional details. So I still have the same drill down functionalities as necessary. But now, not only can I go through and make some quick modifications, so if I have any of these that I want to be able to go through and modify, I can click on that drop down arrow, I can make the changes to it, and you'll notice that as soon as I make that change, that it does have an automatic save function. But as necessary, if there's a reason that I need to make sure that that record gets saved, I also have the ability to click on the save icon to make sure that that value gets updated as necessary. Now, one of the things that you will see is that now when I click on the individual records, that it puts a checkbox next to that record showing that I'm currently modifying it. Now, the other thing you'll also notice is that as I change my views, so let's say I go back to my high priority cases that we created in another lesson, that it does not matter which view that I'm using to be able to still go in and use my editable grids. So if I want to go in and change my origin, again, you'll notice that it allows me to change those depending on regardless of which view I have out there. The other nice thing I can do is, again, I'm going to go back to active cases, is a couple of things that you'll notice will be a little bit different. In the command bar, one of the new actions that you have within the command bar is you now have a new show as feature, which is nice because it allows you to decide if you want to view the grid either as read-only or as editable. And there are times that you'll find that depending on how you're clicking into that particular record, if I try to double click, it sometimes can be a little bit more difficult to be able to actually go into the record itself. So it makes it nice in that you can switch back between the show as read-only versus the show as editable grid. I will say though that just as you start working with this, you get a little bit more comfortable of being able to know when to double click on the record versus a single click to go in and make the modifications as necessary. Now the other thing that you'll also see, and we talked about, is that when we enabled the editable grid control, one of the enabled options was the ability to have the group by column feature. So what's nice about this is that as I'm looking at this information, I want to be able to group it a little bit easier. So let's say I want to group by customer. When I choose group by customer, I can now very quickly and easily see all of my cases grouped on a customer by customer basis. I still have the other functionalities that I need to be able to look at, such as going through and let's say grouping it by priority. And then from here, I can now expand and collapse, so I can now focus on my high priority cases and make modifications as necessary. The other thing you'll see is that I have the default filter turned on, so I can now say that if I just want to filter by email, by my high priority cases, it'll now filter down those records. And again, I can now focus on what I need to be able to focus on. So it makes it a lot easier to be able to look at the records and filter them down to find the specific records that you're looking for, in this case being cases. So again, I can change this by some of the standard columns that I have available in my view. So if I go back and I look at my personal view that I created, and I look at my group by, you'll notice I can do a group by on who modified it. So it looks at the actual columns that you have within your views to be able to choose how you want to group those records. And it makes it very easy now to be able to expand and collapse them so that if I just want to focus on certain owners, I can go through and focus on certain owners. So I can see that one of the records, it's a high priority case, it's owned by another user, but I was the last one to modify it. And then again, to be able to turn that off, I can go up to the group by, choose no grouping, and be able to have my standard view as I had before. So you'll see that editable cases makes it a lot easier that I can now change the values of certain fields directly within the view without having to use any other functionality such as exporting to Excel Online to make mass editing as necessary. So it's a really nice new feature that's available within the Dynamics 365 application. As we mentioned before, it's not just limited to cases. You can do it for KB articles, or you can do it for any existing entity within the system.
When beginning the reporting process, often the most difficult part is answering the question, what do you want the report to show? Coupled with the tendency for most report requests to come to the report writer as a conceptual request versus a well thought out request, this first step can take the longest at times. When asking the report requester for a definition of what they want the report to show, it can be easier if the questions the report designer asks are focused around these 5 concepts. Who? Who will be running the report? The answer to this question can give insight into the design approach. If the person running the report is not technically savvy, or if the nature of his or her job would tend to involve the need to actually drill deeper into the data, the design approach one might take would be impacted. And then we have what. Determining what is going to be displayed can answer the following questions for the report designer. Which data element needs to be queried? How does the data need to be filtered? How should this data be aggregated? Now, it's important to note that answering what should the report show can sometimes be easier to understand if the report requester writes down the report or writes down the request in paragraph format. By using this approach, the report designer and the report requester will be able to parse the request in a more structured manner. And then we have where. Asking from where would you like to run this report helps to determine how the user would like to run or engage with this report. Do they want to run it from a list of records or from a record form? Do they want to access it from the SharePoint site? What about if they want to be able to have the report emailed to them? Or do they want to be able to pull it from a mobile device? Understanding the answer to where can help answer or understand all of these scenarios. And then we also have when. Asking when can provide two different perspectives. When do you want the report completed by? Helps provide timelines and estimates, while at the same time, when do you plan on running the report? Can also determine the frequency of how often the reporting will be run. This could help impact how the report is deployed. If the report is run daily, and because of the complexity of the report, caching reporting data can be very helpful, or perhaps the query pulling the data from the report can require additional optimization. And then last we have why. Understanding why the report requester needs the report can help to understand what is trying to be accomplished or what the specific problem is trying to be solved with the report. It is common for the requester of the report to have determined that a report is the correct solution for the problem. However, there might be less expensive, faster, or more flexible options, such as creating an advanced find might be a need and provide a less expensive and more flexible alternative. After you've gone through the basic questions involved in designing a report, you should now have an understanding of what exactly you're looking for in a report. There are several default service reports available to assist with reporting while utilizing Microsoft Dynamics 365. Some of these include the following, such as the case summary table report. The case summary table reports on opened and resolved cases to help lower support calls and improve your product or services. This report actually tracks service cases and tells you why customers are contacting support. For example, if your company sells cell phones and you find out that the majority of the support calls are due to a faulty phone battery, you can take this information to the team that makes the phone battery so they can fix the issue. This will improve your organization's product and drive support calls down. Essentially, the case summary table provides a list of cases that you can group by owner, customer, status reason, product, priority, subject, origin, case type, satisfaction, service level, or even severity. Then you also have the neglected case report. The neglected case report helps improve your customer service team's KPIs and get more cases closed. With this report, you can quickly identify and take action on cases that haven't been updated recently or that have possibly been neglected. Next to each case listed is the name of the service agent assigned to the case. And then the customer service managers can use this information to follow up with your team and start getting these cases resolved. And then finally, you also have the Service Activity Volume Report. The Service Activity Volume Report shows the amount and length of service activities. Users can utilize this report to review the patterns in service activity volume. It will display either the duration of or number of service activities grouped by services, resources, time periods, and even additional criteria that you can add. And then we also have the Top Knowledge Article-Based Report. The Top Knowledge Article-Based Report shows the most searched knowledge-based articles within your Microsoft Dynamics 365 environment. The information in the report helps identify which issues customers are asking about so that those problems can be addressed, which will improve your product or service. When a service agent receives a phone call or email, the agent searches the knowledge base to see if there's a KB article that can answer the customer's question. This report tells you which of those KB articles are being used the most. In addition, users can adjust the filter to see KB articles grouped by the subject or by the article or case, or even the product associated to the case. The top two that we've discussed, the case summary table and the neglected cases reports, are the most utilized reports within the service module, but the other two are equally as useful. Along with the default service reports within Microsoft Dynamics 365, users may also use the Power BI dashboards to create reports. Power BI dashboards provides the ability to build reports directly from a dashboard, whether it's built-in or custom.
So we're going to go into the system and take a look at some of the different system reports that we have available to us. Now, as we talked about, when you think about report design and thinking about what kind of data do we want to have available for who, what, when, where, and why, that you may find it may not necessarily be required to go in and create new reports when there may be some existing ones that we can use within the system. Or it may be that we determine that building or using the default reports within the system may not be the best tool to use to be able to analyze that information. So before we go and take a look at some of the other reporting tools, I'm going to go through and take a look at what standard reports we have available for the service module. So to be able to do that, we're going to go to our module selector, and from our module selector, we're going to go to service. And then from service, we're going to go all the way to the right, and under the tools section, you'll see that this is where we can look at our standard reports. When we click on reports, you'll see it will give us a list of all the available reports that we have within the entire system. And then it shows us those different report types, whether it's an SSRS report or it's an XML report. Now, in looking at this, as we talked about, probably the two most discussed reports or most used reports within the Dynamics 365 environment for the service module is probably going to be the neglected cases report or the case summary table report. So let's go through and we're going to take a look at what both those reports and what kind of information they provide. So if we scroll through the list, you'll notice that we actually have the option there for our neglected case report. When I click on that report, it's going to launch a SQL reporting services report. And you'll see that by default, there are certain criteria or parameters that I can choose. So if I want to filter it down based on a specific owner or based on a specific customer, I can go through and set up a variety of different parameters to be able to look at those neglected cases. At the same time, if I don't want to have any parameters used, I don't have to put a value in here. So just to be able to go in and run the report, I can click on Run Report. And by default, by leaving those values blank, it assumes I want to look at all neglected reports or all neglected cases for all users, all customers, all dates. And you'll see that, in fact, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to maximize this so we can focus on what we're looking at here, is that when I run the report, you'll see a couple of options that I have available. By default, it will group all of my neglected cases that are minimum that have not been modified, have not been updated in the last 7 days. And you'll see that it's grouping those cases by days neglected. So if I scroll down, you'll see that it just gives me the option of showing that I've got 22 cases that have not been modified or updated in the last or within the last 7 days. You'll also see that I can have a total value up here. And if I want to be able to look at all the records, I can even drill down and be able to look at additional details. Now, before we go that any further, you'll also see that a couple things that if that's not how I want to look at the data, I have a couple of options using my report viewer. One of the options I can have is, let's say, for example, I want to look at the minimum of 14 days and any cases that have not been modified in the last 14 days. You'll see in this case that the value has not changed. But let's say if I look at 21 days, and again, I've run this report, you'll now see that any of the actual cases that we have within the system have been modified or have been looked at within the last 21 days. So you can change the number of minimum days that you want, again, by just typing the value. But then the other thing you can also do is you can change how you want to look at those cases. So for example, let's say I want to look at it and group it by owner. So just changing my group by option when I click on view report, you'll now see I get a whole different view of looking at those neglected cases. I could also, let's say for example, want to do it by customer. So you'll notice if I do it by customer, you'll find that it may not be quite as legible to be able to go in and look at it in that particular group by feature. So we're going to go in and we're going to change that back to owner. Makes it a little bit more presentable. Now, in looking at this, you'll also see that when I'm looking at the actual values on here, if I want to see, well, what are those 16 cases that have been neglected by Lisa? You'll notice I can hover my mouse over that value within the chart, and when I click on it, it will allow me to go in and view the details as to those specific cases. Not only can I view more information on it, so I can see when it was created on, who it was modified, and the current status, and more importantly, the number of days that they've been neglected. So if I want to see, okay, what's going on with this? Again, what's nice is even from the detailed record of the actual case, I can click on the case file or the case title, and it will literally open up the case record for me and allow me to see additional information as to what is going on with that particular case. So you'll now see I can view my case information as necessary. I can close out of that, and I can go back to my actual view. Now, one of the things that you'll see is that it's like, well, I want to see my details, but how do I go back to my chart? So if you look up in the command bar, you'll notice that I have several commands that I can run from here. I can be able, if I've got multiple pages, I can run through and be able to scroll through the pages of records as I need to be able to see. I can resize it as necessary. So if I want to be able to zoom in, I can zoom out. I can even from here be able to export this into other formats. So if I want to put it into XML, comma delimited, even Adobe, Excel, even Word. Or if I just want to be able to refresh the data, I can refresh the data directly from here. But if I want to go back and look at the original chart that I was reviewing of my neglected cases, you'll also see that this is where I have the arrow to go back to the parent report. So now I can go in if I want to be able to drill down and click on the CRM demo user account to be able to see what kind of progress we have on those cases. And the last time that they've touched those cases, I can drill back from there as well. So I go back to my parent report. One of the other things that you'll see is not only do I have the parameters of being able to change the minimum days neglected or the group by, but if I decided that I wanted to now filter down just for a specific customer or any of the other parameters, you'll notice I also have the edit filter functionality. So I can now go in, and if I wanted to, I could change the values. So if I just want to be able to focus on a specific user, I can select that owner of my records and then rerun the report. And as I rerun the reports, again, let's say if I now want to do this by, we'll just do this by owner so we can see, but essentially if I do it by owner, you'll now see that I'm only going to have one owner, and that is because with my filter, I filtered it down just for those records. So being able to run some of the built-in reports that we have available makes it very easy to be able to not only view the data, analyze the data, but continue to drill back and look at the details of the records that are related to those cases. So what's nice about this is, as I mentioned, not only do we have the neglected cases report that's available to us, but one of the more commonly used one as well is the case summary table. Taking a look at the case summary table to be able to see the pattern of cases. Again, By default, we have several parameters or criteria that we can specify. The two default values that are there is where the status is equal to active and the created on is equal to the last month. Well, again, typically that might be something that I want to use, but let's say I might want to do it on a quarterly basis. You'll notice that I can't even change my operation value. So if I want to go through and say I want to be able to look at it for the last number of years, or for the last number of days, or for this month, last month, or so on, that operation value that you have is very similar to what we've seen when dealing with the advanced find feature. So if I just want to be able to go in, and we're just going to keep it as being the default of created on last month. Now again, I can filter down by subject, by product, by customer, even by owner. But I just want to kind of see an overall view of my case summary information to be able to pick up different patterns. So again, I can tell it to run the report. And when I run the report, you'll now see that I can see and broken down by status reason. I can see the total count of cases being 20 for Lisa, 8 for the CRM demo user, and then I have a total number. And then I can even see the percentages broken down by each one. But what's nice about this is being able to look at the case summary table report is it's very similar for those that you've worked with pivot tables before, is I can now rearrange and view this information to be able to see different patterns. So let's say that, again, looking at horizontally, instead of being able to have this going across, I want to be able to go through and have that, let's say, based on priority. And then my vertical, I want to be able to go through and look at that by owner. So if I go and I click on View Reports to kind of show you how it changes the information, it still will allow me to go in and see that the count of number of records that is owned by CRM demo user versus Lisa are going to be the same. But now I can look at the different values based on the priority. And not only can I do it based on priority, but let's also say that as I'm looking at this, I can see that I've got 9 records in high, 9 records in low, and 9 records in high, 9 in normal, and 2 in low. But let's say I want to be able to break that down by customer. So you'll see I have a second vertical group where I can subgroup this information. So I can say, you know what, let's see what that looks like by customer. Again, when I view the report, you'll now see that I can now break it down even further and be able to look at those by customer. Or better yet, let's say I want to do it by origin. So again, run view report, and I can now see for each user the origin of the total number of cases that I'm looking at. So it's almost like working with a pivot table that you have in Excel, except we can do everything within the system. Because again, what's nice about this, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to turn off that second vertical view, just make it a little bit easier to view the records, is that as you'll notice, if I take my mouse and I hover over those values, just like we showed you as far as with the neglected cases report, when I click on that value, it allows me to drill down and look at the additional details of my cases. So then again, from here, if I want to see more detailed information about that case, just as we looked at before, I can click on the actual title or any value of that field, and it will drill down and open up that specific case within the Dynamics 365 environment. So now I can go through and I can look at additional information as necessary and see more about what's going on with that case. And just as we looked at with the neglected cases, if I want to go back to my original case summary table, I can click on the Go Back to Parent. And then from here, if I want to continue to slice and dice this information, I can even set up additional horizontal groups. So again, let's say I want to do this as far as I have high, normal, and low, and I want to break that out into even more details. So let's say I want to be able to go through and I want to look at that based on case type. I click on View Report. I can now see how many high priorities that I have based on the questions, problems, and requests. And then I can have it subtotaled by the high, and then the normal, and then the low. So it makes it really nice to be able to go through and slice and dice your information and still be able to drill back to the original records within the Dynamics 365 environment. Now, as we mentioned, these are just some of the standard reports that are available within Dynamics 365. That does not limit you as to the different reporting tools that you have available. As we'll talk about, you actually have options to be able to further analyze the information within Excel, using either Excel templates or exporting into the different Excel features, or even utilizing the Power BI reports as necessary. The bottom line is that before you go in and you start creating new reports, you can actually review to see if there's existing service or existing reports available within the system, or if we can go in and create the reports using one of the other tools available.
The export to Excel function allows you to export information into Microsoft Excel as static or dynamic worksheets, or even as dynamic pivot tables. It then uses Excel's capabilities to manipulate the data and perform complex analysis. As mentioned earlier, many users will find that analyzing their data within Microsoft Excel will be much easier and less time-consuming than doing it strictly through Dynamics 365. You can export data from Microsoft Dynamics 365 into a Microsoft Excel document from any view in any one of the following formats. The first is we have the static export. A static export exports and creates a copy of the data in Dynamics 365 and converts it into an Excel format. Static exports help user export all rows that are visible to the user at the export time. Then we also have a dynamic worksheet. With a dynamic worksheet, you can export a query with a link back to the Dynamics 365 environment. This type of export causes the data to be loaded dynamically from Dynamics 365, providing Excel data that is always up to date without having to manually refresh it. Now, it's important to note that dynamic exports require a connection back to the Dynamics 365 environment and appropriate permissions. Additionally, they export all the records that are matched to the query. Now, when exporting data to a worksheet, you can add new columns in which to export the data and edit those columns. The third one we have is the dynamic pivot table option. This method is very similar to the dynamic worksheet option, except it also allows you to export the data directly into a pivot table. The users can then select specific columns and rows to be displayed within the report itself. And then finally, we have the Excel Online. Excel Online provides the ability to conduct analysis directly within Microsoft Dynamics 365 without needing the actual Microsoft Excel program on your computer. This allows information to be easily exported and analyzed directly from your mobile device.
All right, so we're going to go in the system. We're going to take a look at how to be able to go through and how to create some Excel templates. Now, as we mentioned, as far as we have different options when it comes to exporting to Excel. And we went through and we took a look at the difference between, or we discussed the difference between exporting to Excel, which again, we have 4 different options. We can open that information within Excel Online. We can be able to modify that information as necessary. We have the static worksheets, which again is basically just a snapshot of the data that we have within, whether it's the view, advanced find, or however we're looking at those records. And then we also have the ability to have a dynamic worksheet or dynamic pivot table. But as we mentioned, with both of those functionalities, it does require a connection to our Dynamics 365 environment, as well as to have the Dynamics 365 for Outlook client installed to be able to refresh the data. So just to kind of take a look at the differences between those. So again, when we have our active cases, I can go and I can choose Open in Excel Online. You will see that it prompts me, letting me know that it is exported to Excel Online, and I can now be able to have ad hoc analysis with full online capabilities, as well as the ability to go through and make modifications or modify the records within an Excel environment. So very similar to what we looked at with the editable grids, is I can be able to go through and make changes to certain fields using Excel Online. So this is really helpful when you're working with some of the data, so that I can go through and I can make mass changes as necessary and be able to update that data. Now, as I go through, and you can even see that I can go back, I can have standard Excel functionality, I can undo, I can update, copy and paste as necessary. But you'll see that when I have the Excel Online, that again, I have a command bar that's available to me. A couple of those commands are, I can simply just do the ad hoc analysis as we were just discussing, be able to manipulate the data, have no effect on the CRM data whatsoever, and be able to return back to my Dynamics 365 environment. Or if I am making and wanting to be able to make those changes, I can click on Save Changes to Dynamics 365. When I click on the change or save changes to Dynamics 365, what that process actually does is it triggers an import process. So it actually takes the data that we've modified within Excel Online and triggers the import process to go in and update those records. So as I go through and I update those records, and sometimes it takes a little bit to go through and update them, I would then see those changes within my view the next time I went through and refreshed the view. Now again, it will take several minutes for that import process to trigger and to be able to update the records. But it is a nice way to be able to go in when you want to be able to make some mass changes to the records, that you can use the Excel Online feature. Now, as we talked about, some of the other functionalities that you have is if I just want to have a static worksheet and I want to be able to manipulate the data, I could click on the static worksheet. You'll see it will export that file as an Excel file. I can then open that Excel file. And then from here, I can edit the records. So you'll see I have all of my records out there. I can now manipulate it. I can save it as an Excel file. I can send it out. I can have it somewhere on my drive to be able to run it and view it as necessary. But again, the problem is though, it's static. If the values change, if these records get closed, if the ownership changes, if the priority changes, anything changes, I will not see those changes reflected in this static Excel spreadsheet. So we need to take in consideration, again, when we talk about report building, of what information do we need, who needs to be able to look at it, and what is the best tool to use to build those reports. Now, there also might be times, as we mentioned, that we want to be able to have an analytical type of tool that can refresh the data on a regular basis. But since I'm very comfortable with Excel, I want to be able to use Excel as that standard tool. Well, that's where the Excel templates can come into play. With the Excel templates, it allows you to be able to create an empty template, so to speak, and be able to build a refreshable report that you can now run whenever you need to be able to look at that data. So to be able to show you how the Excel templates work, we're going to go in and we're going to click on Try It Out. And one of the things that you'll see is that there are some system predefined Excel templates that are available, like being able to look at your case SLA status. And from here, I'm just going to go in and click on Open in Excel Online to kind of show you what some of these system Excel reports look like. So from here, as far as going through and looking at the report, you'll notice that I now have cases with first response violating this week, resolved by violating this week, active cases with non-compliant first response SLAs. So from here, you already have a report that's available. But what's nice about this is if I make changes, so if I go through and I want to be able to filter down my information, as I go through and filter down my information, I can see those filters reflected within the case. Take a look at the other one that we have, and again, we're not going to save the changes on them, so we'll just kind of show you some of the standard templates that are available. I also have my case summary Excel template. And being able to look at this particular one. So you'll see, I can see cases created per day, cases by subject and priority, cases just by priority. And then again, I have all of the records that I could go through and I can review by simply filtering down and looking at the record information as I want to. So again, I can use my equal. I could go through, be able to set up the different criteria. So let's say I want to be able to do this for where it contains coho. I select OK. And you'll now see it will filter down that record. And I can still now be able to have my analytical information above as necessary. And again, what's nice about this is not only can I open that within Excel Online, but I can open it directly within Excel so that any user who wants to be able to look at that information can be able to open it on any platform, such as on the phone or in the tablet, or even within Excel. And then what's nice about this is you also have the ability to create your own Excel templates. So let's say that we want to be able to go through and I want to be able to look at the number of days between when the case was created on versus when it was modified. So I'm going to see how many days have passed between the created on date and the modified date. And I want to be able to have that available within Excel so I can do further analysis on this. So what we can do to be able to create our own Excel templates is I can click on the Excel templates, and then from here I have the option of choosing Create Excel Template. Now when I do, you'll see that the same steps are going to be identical for the Excel templates as well as your Word templates. Now on this one, we're going to go ahead and we're going to keep Excel templates selected. And then I have the ability, again, very similar to the advanced find feature, is I can do it on an entity by entity basis. And you'll see I can do it for any of the available entities within the system. And I can even be able to tell it as far as which view I want to start as being a standard template to base off of. So if I even have my own personal templates or my own personal views I have available, I can build off of those. And just like the advanced find feature, I can even go through and before I export the data into Excel, I can edit the columns. So here would be a great example where I want to edit the columns to include my modified on date because I want to be able to calculate and have an Excel formula to calculate the difference of days between my created on field and my modified on field. So I want to click on the Add Columns, and I want to scroll down and choose my modified on field. Select OK. And then if I wanted to rearrange these columns in a little bit more logical format, especially if I'm dealing with case or if I'm dealing with charts or I'm dealing with pivot tables, this is also where I can remove columns as necessary. But for the most part, on this particular example, we're going to leave all the other existing columns and just include the modified on for as a new one. I'm going to select OK. And now once I select OK, I'm going to tell it to download the file so I can now start building the template as necessary. You'll see it's similar to downloading the other Excel files in that the default name that is used is based on the view that it was created off of. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on Open. And then once I click on Open, I do want to go ahead and I want to enable editing so I now can make some adjustments as necessary. Go ahead and we're going to maximize this and we're going to shrink this down a little bit just so we can see all of these fields that we're working with. Now, as I mentioned, one of the things I want to be able to do, and what's the nice thing about working with Excel templates, is it allows me to be able to add additional fields that may not necessarily be available within the system. So I might want to have a calculated field that goes in and calculates the difference of days between these two fields. So even though it may not be a field that's available within the Dynamics 365 environment, does not mean that I cannot use it for more analysis. So I might put on here number of days. And you'll see as soon as I press my Enter key, it now recognizes and makes it a part of the standard table. So now once I've done that, I can now use my formula. So I'm going to basically say we're going to do this as being my date diff. And I want to calculate the days between my created on field, my modified on field, and then be able to calculate it. I want to do it based on days. And as soon as I do that, you'll now see that it calculates from when the date was or when the record was created versus the last time it was modified and how many days in between those two fields. So now, once I have this information, again, I'm going to shrink it down just a little bit so we can just see the records a little bit more. Once I do that, I now want to be able to have a nice chart that a user can go through and be able to look at that information. So what I can do is I'm going to click on the Insert, and again, this is now all standard Excel functionality. I'm going to click on my Insert tab, and I'm going to click on Pivot Chart. I'm going to tell it that I want to create a pivot chart. So you'll notice that it goes in and asks me what range do I want to use. But because we exported the data out of the Dynamics 365 environment, it automatically recognizes the existing range of records as being that table. I can also choose where I want this information to show up. Do I want it on a new worksheet or do I want it on the existing worksheet? We're going to go ahead and we're going to keep the default settings that we have here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to choose OK. And now once I choose OK, I can now decide how do I want to build this chart. So to be able to build the chart, let's say that I do want to be able to go through and I want to evaluate the number of days. And I also want to be able to evaluate based on priority. So you'll notice that when I choose priority, it now will go through and allow me to be able to change the axis. And let's say maybe I want that as being my legend. So you'll now see that I can rearrange and be able to manipulate the data a little bit more. I can also, if I want to be able to go through, and I can format my information. So if I want to go through and format, I can go through and change colors. And have it updated. So you can go through and just building a standard chart, you can make changes as necessary. So if I want to be able to look at the different gamut of colors as necessary, you'll see I could go in and change the styles of how I want it to look. So I can have it looking nice and professional. But what's also nice about this is let's say that not only do I have this and I have the number of days, let's say I want to change that where it doesn't say number of days. Let's just say as far as it's going to be days in between. So you'll notice that when I change my pivot table, it will also change the value within my pivot chart and the pivot table. And again, to make this a little bit more dynamic, I'm going to go ahead and rearrange this. And I'm also going to go through and I'm going to add some additional records. So I want to be able to insert a slicer. And the slicer I want to be able to have is I want to be able to do it by origin as well as priority. And let's also say I want to do it by owner. So now I actually has these slicers. So again, I can resize these as I want to. And we have to take in consideration that they might grow. And then I want to put them in a location to where they're not going to interfere with my chart. In fact, we're going to put it over here so it doesn't interfere with my pivot table or my chart. So now, as we want to go through and we want to slice and dice this information, as I click on the actual users, you'll now see that the value will change. So it allows me to go through and be able to manipulate and dynamically change the values by simply using some of the standard Excel functionality. So I can turn the filters on, I can turn them off, I can modify them as necessary. So now that I have this report in the format that I want to be able to use, and I've gone through and I've done all the testing and it looks exactly the way I want it to be, what I can now do is I'm going to go up to my file menu, and you'll notice right now it's set to being read-only. I'm going to save as. I can choose where I want this to go. I'm going to actually just put this as far as on our desktop, and we'll call this one Case Analysis by Days and Priority. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to save that. So now that I'm done with my Excel template, you'll notice that, again, we can do some formatting. And I still have my active cases. So I still have all the original underlying data that I'm using to be able to manipulate and build this particular dashboard within Excel. So once I've gone through and I've done that, now what I can do to have it available as an Excel template within the Dynamics 365 environment is I can go back to the Excel templates. I'm going to click on Create Excel Templates again, except this time I'm going to tell it that I want to upload a new Excel template. So when I click on Upload, I can now either drag the file or browse out to where the file is. So again, from here, I can go to my desktop, find that Excel file, click on Open, and then from here, I'm going to upload it. Now, in the process of uploading it, you'll notice that there are some additional things I can do with that Excel template. By default, you'll see as soon as it's uploaded, it's automatically activated. If I choose, I just want to change the name and how it appears within the Dynamics 365 environment, I can change the name to make it a little bit simpler so that, again, users, when they see that, they'll know exactly what type of information that's going to give me. I can even give it additional descriptions. And then you'll see that I can also track as to the last time it was created, when it was modified, the type, and then even have as far as different languages. You'll also see that at this point, if I want to be able to share it, I can share it. If I want to assign it to other users, in other words, if I'm responsible for just creating the Excel templates, but I want to be able to create it for another user, I can now assign it to another user. Once we've gone through, though, and we've made the modifications, we can then come in, I'm going to make sure I save that, and we can close out of here. So now, once we have that Excel template, what we should be able to do is when we go up to the Excel templates, you'll now see that it creates it as being a personal Excel template. So just like what we looked at about the system created ones, I can click on the Excel template and I can either choose to open it in Microsoft Excel Online or I can download it. So if I go and I choose Open in Excel Online, very similar to what we saw in the other environment, is now from here, if I want to be able to go through, I can now dynamically go in and make modifications and see the results of that information without having to know how to go in and create pivot tables or pivot charts. So we can just do some basic training and allow now users to do further analysis of the data within the Dynamics 365 environment. Now, one thing I do want to draw your attention to is that by default, in using the Excel templates, you'll notice that when we chose to do a upload from the Create Template environment, that by default will create personal Excel templates. The question is, well, what if I want it to be available for everybody within the system? Well, like other functionalities we have within the Dynamics 365 environment, there's always more than one way to do something. So just so you can see, I also have the ability to manage my Excel templates, not just from the command bar, but if I go to Settings, and from Settings, if I choose Templates. When I choose Templates, this is where I have my document templates. And then from here, you'll see I can see all of the default Excel templates that are available, not just for the service module, but even for the sales module. And if I wanted to, I could have the ability to upload the template from here. And when I upload the template from here, just to show you the difference, is you'll notice the steps are the same. It's automatically activated. But from here, I also have the ability to enable it for specific security roles. So if there's only specific security roles that I want to be able to have access to this, then from here, I can go through and be able to disable any of those that may not need to use that report or use that particular Excel template. Now, again, I'm going to go ahead and just enable that for everyone. So you'll see it's a little bit different in that from here, I can now fine tune this. I also have the ability to deactivate it because, again, now it's a system Excel template. If I want to be able to go through and make some modifications, I can deactivate it, modify it, and then go in and reactivate it as necessary. So once I have it out there, again, to kind of show you what that will do, is we'll go back to our service, we'll go back to our cases, and now when I go under my Excel templates, you'll now see that it becomes a system Excel template. Now, last but not least, the other question usually comes up is, this is great, but I now have my personal Excel templates, which I can assign or share with other users, and I have the ability to have system Excel templates. But what if I realize that now it's a system Excel template? How do I get rid of the personal Excel template? Well, by default, this is one of the other functionalities that you have with the Advanced Find tool. If I click on the Advanced Find tool, one of the actual entities that's available when I choose a look for is personal Excel templates. So if I go and I choose my personal document templates and I click on results, you'll now see that it shows all of the personal Excel templates that I've created. And what's nice about this is if I decide I want to delete it, I can highlight the actual Excel template that I want to delete. And then from here, I can click on the delete icon, confirm that I want to delete it. And then once I delete it, you'll see that if we go back to my Excel templates, let's refresh this. That it will actually go through, and we'll probably have to refresh the screen. But when I go through and refresh it, that personal Excel template would no longer be there. So again, the advantage of working with the Excel templates is it allows you to have a refreshable Excel report that does not require you to have the Dynamics 365 for Outlook component installed, but it still allows you to have a refreshable data that you can come in and perform further analysis, have calculated fields, and be able to use pivot tables and the standard functionalities of the Microsoft Excel tool.
So as we talked about, we really have two different ways to be able to work with the data within Microsoft Excel coming from the Dynamics 365 environment. We have the ability to export to Excel using one of 4 different formats. So we looked at, we actually can export it using the static worksheets, which again will just give us a snapshot of the data that we're working with. Also, as we discussed, we can use the Excel Online that will allow us to be able to go in, edit the data directly within Excel and have it update within Dynamics 365. And then also, we discussed our dynamic worksheet and our dynamic pivot table, which will allow us to be able to have a refresh of the data within the Microsoft Dynamics 365 environment. But also, as mentioned, it does require us to have the Dynamics 365 Outlook client. Whereas with our Excel templates, when we're using Excel templates, all the data dynamically refreshes from within Excel every time that we actually open that Excel file. In addition, users can choose to create whether it's simple lists, tables, charts, or pivot tables, and be able to have them dynamically update whenever they open up that Excel file. So we'll go through this. We'll actually go in and demonstrate how the Excel templates work within Microsoft Dynamics 365. So as we've seen in this module, Microsoft Dynamics 365 provides an array of analytical tools that are available for users and managers to be able to review and analyze data in a very quick and easy manner. In this module, the objectives were to discover how to work with the Advanced Find feature, as well as to identify how to best work with the Editable Grids. We also reviewed working with the Report Wizard, as well as how to utilize Excel by exporting data and using Excel templates.